Good morning. Thank you for coming so early. Just a quick query before I start. How many Bengalis in the audience? Right. And Salil, you too. All of you are as qualified as Bengalis to moderate this session. And like every Bengali, I claim that I know about Tagore, but my knowledge is very limited to what my father played to me as a child. Just to introduce this session, and let me give you a little bit of an anecdote. As I said, as a Bengali child, father playing music, there was a kind of resistance to Tagore and Rabindra Sangit. We preferred rock and roll and Rolling Stones in the 1980s. I came to Tagore much later in 2003 as a Probashi Bangali moving to London. And last year, my son being about 4 years old and having rediscovered Tagore, I decided to spend about 9 months in Shantiniketan, and where I was hoping that my son would pick up Bengali. He didn't pick up Bengali, but he learned 5 Bengali songs just by being 5 Tagore songs, not understanding what those words meant, but he knew it because of the atmosphere that he was in, the kind of culture that he was imbibing, and he could sing the songs verbatim. This brings me to starting off today's conversation is, unlike any other writers, artists that I can think of, including Shakespeare, the way Tagore is practiced in Bengali homes every day, all over the world, seems quite unique to me. One of the things, therefore, which I started thinking, Bashabi, Reba, is that somehow he managed to transcend that divide which we perhaps falsely create of high art and popularity. So I'll start with asking you both, what was it that made Tagore extremely popular and critically relevant? Reba, do you want to go?
Well, I think you had titled this session Bengal Renaissance and Tagore. And one has to remember the age that Tagore was in. It was a new age. It was called Navojug. It was a time when there was Western education which came in. People got English educated, people got jobs. But on the other hand, there was also an attachment, a deep attachment to old values, because many of these newly educated people, the Bhadralok, realized that the colonial Raj would also dismiss them as being effeminate, the effeminate Indian as against the manly Englishman. And they sort of smarted under that. And they looked back, therefore, at their own tradition and values. And Tagore was somebody who, like a colossus, strode the two between modernity and tradition. And to answer your question, he was so eclectic that he drew inspiration from all. He drew inspiration from tradition, and he also was open to influences from the West. And as a result, his work of literature, his songs, his music and so on, are very contemporary, but at the same time, they have taken the wealth of tradition. And one in particular was the itinerant singers of rural Bengal, the minstrels, the baul. And the baul music was at that time quite dismissed by the sophisticated urban elite. But Tagore main-staged them, brought them in, because he found a resonance with his own thoughts and own philosophy, which is that there is a divine within you. You don't need to go to temples. You don't need to have idols. Of course, he was of the Brahmo faith, so he didn't believe in the ritual Hinduism. But that spoke to him. And then at the same time, he went to the West for cultural influences there. So therefore, today, he remains relevant because Tagore's language, first he broke away from the Sanskritized idiom. It was the spoken Bengali, the same Bengali that we speak today. Today, Tagore is not archaic. We don't have to look at dictionaries and annotated notations like we do for Shakespeare. Today, you read Tagore, and if your Bengali is good, you read him and you understand him straight away. So there was an innocence and a simplicity in his verses without any mythological underpinnings. So you didn't have to scamper for internet and to find out what meant what. That is actually what Yeats found the most appealing. It was the simplicity and the innocence. And that's why even today, your son could, take those verses And if you explain to him the meanings, it wouldn't be very complicated. I think that's what it meant for me.
Professor, just to kind of add to this, the context in which Tagore worked and popularity, can you kind of carry on from what Reba just said?
Yes, I think what Reba was talking about was also his inner life and the outer life and how he bridged the gap. But also I must say that Tagore was, as you also pointed out, about narrowing the gap between Sadhu Bhasha and Cholit Bhasha, which is the classical Bengali and the popular Bengali. Actually, initially, it wasn't accepted. He was always going against the grain. I mean, even the Bengal Renaissance was against the grain. And even in Calcutta University, quite near his Nobel Prize, they were given a passage of Tagore and asked to write it in proper Bengali. So he didn't have an easy ride, let's put it this way. But as I say, I've just written a definitive biography of Tagore. It's called Rabindranath Tagore. My publisher's here from Reaction Books, and it should be out in July. But I have an advanced copy. But what I have tried to do in the book is what brought me to Tagore. I can say, listening to Reba today morning, you sang Anandagan. Here in London, my parents, who were at the London School of Economics as researchers, they celebrated in 1961 Tagore's centenary. And my mother actually sang Anandadhara Bohiche Bhubane, which is about this tide of Ananda, of joy, everywhere. So my first initiation to Tagore was through my mother's, like your father's music. And also one day while my mother was drawing maps, I thought she was a map maker. I didn't know she was a geographer. And she was drawing maps on the floor. She suddenly stopped and she sang Purano Shei Diner Kotha, which you finished off with, Auld Lang Syne. And then she stopped after 2 lines. And I said, Ma, what was that? Could you sing all of it? At that time, I didn't know that it was an adaptation of Robbie Burns' Auld Lang Syne. I live in Scotland, and I have tried to draw the bridges between Scotland and India in the very spirit of Tagore. So I think what Tagore did was he bookended the Bengal Renaissance. It started off with Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Dwarkanath, and then Debendranath, who was a stalwart who took forward the monotheistic movement of Brahmoism. It was a reform movement. It was an awakening of Bengal and India. It was a cultural, educational, religious reform movement. And Tagore, in his secularity, in his transnationalism, his love of freedoms in multiple forms, actually took the Bengal Renaissance forward and took India into the modern era. So while he was a romantic on the one hand, yes, nature poems, he loved the monsoons. We hope the monsoons don't come here. But he has been accused of being a romantic. But I think right at the end, he was really disturbed by the debates of modernity and modernism. And I want to stress, he wasn't a modernist. He was a modern. And he himself said that. And I think that is very important to remember, because what Tagore was doing was he was leaving a legacy behind, which we can all benefit from. As some Bengalis here will know, we are steeped in Tagore. You know, from, somebody said, from Janma to Mrityu, from birth till death, there's always a song from Tagore that we can sing somewhere. And I feel that my debt to Tagore began with my parents, with my mother. My debt to Tagore began with me. I couldn't sing. Reba, like you, I can't sing. So, but I danced Tagore's dance dramas. I choreographed. I directed. I was quite horrified when at this wonderful books festival they put me down as a dancer. And I thought, oh gosh, no, I can't live up to that. It's just a love of life, you know. And so I think Tagore, with his multifarious, myriad-minded genius, did what I think a lot of people haven't done. He not only was a poet, a novelist, a short story writer, an essayist, huge letter writer, not emails. He really wrote longhand, as we know, and he gave lectures. He introduced the short story into Bengali for the first time. He was writing when Chekhov and Maupassant were writing. At the same time, he introduced the prose poem into Bengali. He invented the dance drama genre and his whole brand of Rabindra Sangeet, which Reba has just done a beautiful rendition of. So I think I just want to stress two more things. He began the cooperatives in his various estates. And I'm really grateful to Reaction Books for commissioning me to write this book. Otherwise, I might have written another book on Tagore, which I still will. What we have to remember is a Nobel laureate who wrote primers. Do we have any Nobel laureates who wrote primers when there were no primers modern enough for their children? He established a school at Shantiniketan. He established Bishwabharati, the first international university in India, and that's Sriniketan, the Rural Reconstruction Center, and he carried on the cooperative movement within his essays in Sriniketan. And today we have the transition movement in Britain, and we have Dartington Hall still celebrating Tagore's festival. So I'll end there, and I'll let Somnath pick up from there.
There's so many points immediately which come and makes me go away from my prepared questions. One was Tagore's conversations with writers in the West. The other, which I was thinking of, is Tagore being the songwriter, the essayist, the novelist, short story writer. I'll start with that point first to both of you. And this is very personal, that reading Tagore's short stories and novels and then listening to his songs, Rabindra Sangeet, I used to be quite amazed that the same person has written in both the genres because they're so different. Socially, politically astute short stories, Choturango, for example, which debunks so many religious myths, and then his songs. Do you find that there is this kind of several people almost writing when Tagore writes?
Well, I think his music was the most integral part of Tagore. Tagore says that of all his works, his music was the real him, if you will, and that he wrote as an inspired person. His music came to him as an inspiration. And unlike his prose or his poetry, when he had to think of his detractors, he had to think of his critics, and he was very conscious of a movement against him. He had many detractors, and he was very conscious of what fault they would find in him. In fact, in one of his famous works, Sheshir Kobita, he positions himself as somebody who's at the receiving end of a lot of, criticism, literary criticism. His music was not. He says he never knew where that inspiration came from. So that was something, a connect with the divine, which he really did feel. And even he writes all this, on a moonlit night, suddenly something seizes him. He comes out and the words pour and the music pours. And he is unable to even write it down because he didn't know staff notation. And there are hilarious incidents in his life which I have detailed in my book on Tagore, where he just doesn't know what to do because he doesn't know how to put on the notation. And he depends on his nephew, Dinu Thakur, for it. And at that time, Dinu Thakur was not there. So he's in the bathroom and he's having a bath. And suddenly this music comes to him of this particular song. So he's hammering away at the door and telling the gardener, go find some of my women students, two very favorite students of his, bring them over. So they're outside his bathroom door and he's singing from here, putting mugfuls of water on his head. And he's saying, just take it down, it'll go away. Now, this is something which meant, as he said himself, he said, my music is my main contribution. People in India do not know. People in the world will never know until they come to know the culture. He says this. So I think, to come back to what you're saying, there has to be a big difference between a studied approach to his writings and to a totally innocent, spontaneity in his musical compositions, which is why they remain, which is why I have written this, that to many of us, Tagore is our personal religion. You don't need rituals, you don't need churches, temples, whatever. You just sing one or two songs which are relevant when you're really feeling down or low or feeling joyous or whatever. Just choose one of those songs and you say, hey, he wrote that for me. How did he know that this is exactly what I feel, except I wouldn't know how to say it so nicely.
Really, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I think his songs definitely speak to everybody, from the boatmen on Bengal's rivers to lovers who haven't yet told the world of their love, and to even people who have sung them beyond Bengali, like Danilu. So I think songs can cross linguistic borders because of the melody. The words, of course, have to also be there. But to go back to your question, I think Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, in his book Rabindranath Tagore, about his intellectual life and interpretation, he says there were two Tagores. One was the mystic, whom the West embraced, and which Tagore actually encouraged to a certain extent, this figure of the sage, the Eastern sage. But also there was a fairly intelligent, intellectual man who knew something about the history of the world. In my book, I've said there are many Tagores, and I think it's still the same Tagore. And so I take it from Sabyasachi's theory, but I believe that the man who wrote novels, we began with the Bengal Renaissance. He was looking at issues within society. He could not step away from them. And that is why in his novels, in his short stories, he goes back again and again to the woman's question, the woman's position, to what politics does to personal relationships, and also his own stand as a patriot, not a narrow nationalist. So I think they're all intertwined. If you look at the Swadesh songs, he wrote 23 songs when during the Bengal, that period of the first partition of Bengal, when it was first mooted by Lord Curzon. So that can be directly interlinked with his whole idea of nationalism. The 3 essays in which he makes the distinctions between nation with a small n, Samaj, society, and nation, the state, with a capital N, which never really thinks about the people. So I think all Tagore's works are seamless, and I hope I've tried to do that, show how his life and work are interrelated, and we can't really separate the two. Can I just say one more thing? Tagore wrote in Bengali. Of course he did. But when William Rothenstein asked him to translate some of his works, and he brought Gitanjali to William Rothenstein, and then he won the Nobel Prize, not just on one book, on several others which the Nobel Committee had, including The Gardener and the Songs of Love and Life, Glimpses of Bengal, including Noibeddo Khea in Bangla, and there was S.A. Stegner who knew Bengali. I just want to say Tagore suddenly realized that this had catapulted him onto the world stage. Here he had a duty to bring the East and West together. He carried on the Bengal Renaissance beyond beyond Bengal's borders, beyond India's borders. He was a cultural ambassador trying to bring the East and West together. And I think what Sir Dominic Asquith says, he was a live bridge between the world. And today what the Jaipur Literary Festival is doing today is exactly the same, creating a global bridge.
Can I, talking about Tagore, politics, questions about society, there is this, those of you who follow Indian politics will know that a Bengali lady is having very strong words with a Gujarati gentleman at this point of time in India. Tagore and Gandhi, the Bengali and the Gujarati of slightly different, they use words differently. They also had a long conversation. And at times they were at loggerheads. Their writings on nationalism comes from very different ideas. Reba, would you want to start?
Yeah, that is very interesting. I think Tagore has been called the dissenter of dissenters by Ashish Nandi, because the one thing that he believed in was freedom of the mind, and he wasn't going to be put into any particular channel of thought if he didn't believe in it. And so he told Gandhi that, look, I don't believe in your non-cooperation. when you have this whole thing of non-cooperation to encourage all the young students to leave their schools and colleges, I think you're leading them into an alley of despair. Now, he certainly didn't believe in non-cooperation when he had his university and he was getting faculty from abroad and getting cultural influences from abroad. So that wasn't part of what, his ethos was. The other thing that he told Gandhiji is, look, I can't spin, the compulsory spinning. He said,
He had
I
people
can't
to spin for him.
He said, I can compose my song equally effortlessly as you spin your charkha. But don't ask me to do that. I can't do it. Now, there were two other things adding to which I just wanted to share because I think it's so interesting. At a time when, women's education was really just about taking off, and from, middle class homes, the Bhadralok homes, women were being given an education, but there was no question of their going off to another university and studying with boys, which is what Shantiniketan was. But he did it. So he got women students to come over. And these parents, quite well, they were very cautious, but they allowed their, wards to come. And so you had women students in Shantiniketan along with the men. And then he did co-educational dance dramas where you had men and women. And then he got troops to accompany him abroad. He went to Sri Lanka, for example, or to various parts of India with his combined troops of these women students and men students performing together. And of course, what he did was he would always sit on the stage and he'd give himself a role like a grandfather, if you will, Thakur Dada or something, so that the parents were assuaged that, no hanky-panky there. But this was a huge step. And the second thing I wanted to mention, this is what we are talking about being modern, and what Bashabi said, not a modernist, but modern. And this is tremendously modern at that time, I think. I mean, everybody would agree with that. The other thing is that he was always in financial stress. His university never did well. And he was always wondering what to do. Gandhi at one point stepped in and said, look, I've persuaded my friend G.D. Birla, the industrialist, to give you a handsome corpus. Now you behave yourself and you use that corpus and you stay within that. Now you think Tagore would ever listen to that. He took that amount and of course that helped him through. But the next minute he was off with his troop again. And this time he said, I'm going to charge a certain amount for people to come and listen to participate in my shows. This was pure anathema to Gandhi. He says this is like begging. And there's this fantastic exchange of letters between them in the same book that Bashabi mentions, where Tagore says, it's almost like, it's like mercy which is twice blessed, those who give and those who take. He says, those who come into my cultural programs receive so much that they should, as a token of appreciation, give me something. In other words, there's no such free exchange. I mean, he didn't say that in so many words. But this concept, I think, is so modern, so very modern, even to this day, that Gandhi would, of course, not even understand it. But I totally see where he was coming from. So this is...
Yeah, thank you. Bashabi?
Gandhiji and Rabindranath, again, I've written about them, not just in this book, also in various articles. Yes, they disagreed. They had a long chat in Shantiniketan and they agreed to disagree. So that was fine. Gandhiji was called the Mahatma by Rabindranath, popularized as the Mahatma. Gandhi called Rabindranath Gurudev, the divine teacher, which also Nehru, our first Prime Minister, called Rabindranath. Today, we still say Gurudev. So there was mutual respect between the two of them. They didn't agree on a lot of things, including cooperation. In fact, Rabindranath wrote to C.F. Andrews saying, it is the biggest irony that today the non-cooperative movement is gathering momentum in my country while I talk about cooperation amongst nations. So, he was way ahead of his time. And Nehru said of Gandhi and Tagore, when Tagore died, he was in jail, and he said that he was very lucky to have known two of the best men in his life. And in spite of India's subservient position, and then he had a little rider. He said maybe because of it, that two such great men were born at the same time. And what Ashish Nandi says is that while Nehru acknowledged he had two gurus, what he didn't say was Gandhi was his political guru, but Rabindranath is the intellectual guru. And to spurn Rabindranath today in India is to deny the modern consciousness of India for which Rabindranath stands. Gandhi and Nehru, what did they agree on? They agreed on the diversity of the nation. They agreed on Hindu-Muslim unity. They agreed on the caste system pulling India behind. They agreed on education being the way forward, on the mother tongue being the medium of education. So there was a lot that they agreed in, the fundamental tenets. But maybe on the political stage, Gandhiji apparently didn't believe in dialogue, but he did. He went to the round table initially. Rabindranath, right from the beginning till the end, believed in dialogue. He felt that all wars could be prevented, all conflict could be prevented if people could have dialogues, but also if the East and West could learn from each other through mutual respect and understanding.
But it's also amazing that Tagore's letters to Gandhiji is such an amazing exposition of how language can be used in politics. And given where we have landed up in today's world, the fall is quite drastic. We spoke, Reba, of Tagore and how the Western literary world received him in the beginning. But there was a very quick rejection also of Tagore in the West, especially in the literary circles. That kind of, it went up very quickly, and the downfall also, Ezra Pound, Auden, as you said, there was a quick critique. Can you talk us through a bit of what happened there?
Well, this is all about the English language.
And Tagore in translation, therefore, sometimes been difficult to read.
Yes,
in fact, his own translations.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there was two sides to it. On the one hand, Tagore was diffident about his English. He was tutored at home. On the other hand, he also wanted to present his works and to judge how the West received it. It's almost like his artwork. His art, which was really something that he realized that contemporary India couldn't fathom. And yet he wanted the West, it was expressionism really. And the West to appreciate, so he had his exhibitions in Moscow and in Paris and so on and so forth. So there was this bit in him, I mean, it was very human, that there was this great diffidence, and yet there was also this curiosity to see how the West received it. And in fact, the story behind Gitanjali is fascinating, because this was in the year 1911 when he was supposed to go to England and he couldn't because he fell ill. He went to his riverine estates in Bengal, and there he was recovering from his illness, and he didn't want to take on anything serious at that time, serious writing. So what he did is he pulled out his own poems from all his various collection of poems that he had. He pulled them out and said, why don't I translate? And I tried to get the feeling of that bliss that I felt when I wrote them in my original Bengali. So he started translating them, but as a pastime. As he told, I think it was Andrews, that was like a schoolboy exercise. So he had his little manuscript book, and he kept doing. And then he went, the next year he went to England. In those days he had to travel by sea. He was seasick. He sat on the deck and he went on plodding away with his little notebook. And then he lands in London. And of course, Rothenstein has met him the year before. And he wants to hand over this to Rothenstein just to see how the poet fraternity would, it was like testing ground for him. But can you imagine, he discovers he's lost his manuscript. He went by London Underground, which overwhelmed him. And then I think Paddington or wherever, that whole briefcase was left behind. And, but then miraculously, it was found in the Lost and Found the next morning. And thank God for that. And that's how the Nobel happened. But yeah, so that book of poems was then given to Rothenstein. He gave it to Yeats. And Yeats felt that nothing like this has thrilled him for years. And he went on buses and restaurants reading this voraciously, even shielding it from others who came in because they might be inquisitive about what this man is so much into. That's what he writes in his preface to Gitanjali. So all this happened, and he calls this an amazing discovery. But as Somnath says, that somewhere along the line, there was this feeling that, well, the English wasn't quite, it was a foreigner's English, which of course it was. And he went on to say some rather sharp words, Yeats did. And he said in a letter that no Indian can write English. And the reason is because it has to come from one's lived culture. The sensibilities of one's lived culture are reflected in the language that you use. And therefore, this is what he felt. Tagore himself had a lot of diffidence. And in fact, in August of 1913, in London, he was recovering from surgery. He had this feeling, you know, it was very ominous to him. He felt, gosh, I think I'm going to land up with some prize or something, and I'm really nervous about this. So he writes a song. This is the best thing that he could do. And he says, E Muniha Ramayana,
Yes.
which is a fantastic song that he wrote. He says, this gemstone does not me become. To wear it, it pains. To tear it, it hurts. And so on. This is this famous song that he writes. So it's
You
this,
wouldn't hum a couple of lines from that? So
oh,
there's
good.
Bulbul.
Gosh, that wasn't on the agenda, was it? I have to.
Kaligola.
Kaligola.
Ante paro. Well, then that'll have to come right at the end. Jodi harmonium ano, sheshe gaibo tahale. ঠিক আছে যদি আনো
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay,
Right. Yeah, it's fine. We await that. Would you want to add to that?
I think Tagore had the humility of a great mind. And humility is not necessarily a recognition that he was inadequate, but it was the humility of somebody who knew a lot and understood a lot. And great scholars are humble. I also have found out slowly through my own research that a lot of it was bound with the politics of the time. We have to remember that when Tagore won the Nobel Prize, he was the subject of a subject nation. That hadn't been heard before. There was a lot of anger. I mean, even Bernard Shaw, who wrote a play lampooning him, where one of the characters was called Begor. Stupendranath Begor. And then, but later when he had a long dialogue with Rabindranath, he realized that here was a great mind, and when Rabindranath died, he actually recommended that his portrait go up in the British Gallery. So I think that coming round, a lot of it was also because Tagore was considered a radical, and he had, even before he gave back the knighthood because of the Amritsar massacre, he was considered a rebel. In fact, people were sent to his university to spy on him, to see what he was doing. So I think that sort of doubt about what Tagore was up to, and poor man, he was in America, and he had no idea. He was going from one part of the country to another, and there had been this assassination attempt because he was considered a revolutionary. I don't know whether it was merciful or not, but one of the would-be assassins managed to shoot the other in the lobby. So Tagore had no idea what was happening, why there was this huge police escort to take him away. So I think a lot of it was bound up with the fact that he was against imperialism, imperial expansionism, and he was a strong voice. So I don't think, I just want to add one thing, and that is even William Radice, who is one of the leading translators of Tagore today, has said recently that he has realized that Rabindranath's translation of the Gitanjali as prose poems remain the best. So I think people are coming round to the fact that Tagore's own detraction from himself was actually from his humility. He wasn't totally uneducated, he read a lot, but also he was at London University, and he did attend English lectures, and he read Goethe in German, Maupassant in French, and he of course knew Sanskrit and and in his household they read Hafiz every day and the Upanishads. So he was versatile. This man was open to languages and cultures. Over to Reba.
Then we'll read after this. Yeah. We'll end with you. Right?
I'll first read out the translation that I made of the song in my book. August 1913, Chains Walk, over here in London. This necklace of gems does not me become. To wear it is painful, to tear it is clamorous. My throat it chokes, and not a note emerges. My mind lies elsewhere, and dwells not on work. This is why I sit and wait. Could I but put this round your neck, I would gain respite. With a garland of flowers, accept me, for I dare not show my face to you, ashamed of the necklace of gems. He Muniharamaye nahi shaje. He Muniharamaye nahi shaje. Ere porte gele lage, ere chirte gele baje. He Muniharamaye nahi সাজে কণ্ঠ যে রোধ করে সুর তো নাহি স্বরে কণ্ঠ যে রোধ করে সুর তো নাহি স্বরে ওই দিকে যে মন পড়ে রয় মন লাগে না কাজে এ মনিহারামায় নাহি সাজে তাই তো বসে আছি এ হার তোমায় পরাই যদি তবে আমি বাঁচি তাই তো বসে আছি ফুলো মালার ডোরে বরিয়ানো মোরে ফুলো মালার ডোরে বরিয়ানো মোরে তোমার কাছে দেখাইলে মুখ মনি মালার লাজে এ মনিহারামায় নাহি সাজে এড়ে পড়তে গেলে লাগে এড়ে ছিঁড়তে গেলে বাজে এ মনিহারামায় নাহি সাজে
Thank you, Ravi. As three Bengalis talking about Tagore, we run out of time. So we will end this conversation between us with a reading from Bashabi's new book coming out, and then we'll open it to the audience. Bashabi?
I'll just be very brief because it's a hard act to follow after Reba. Tagore's appearance on the world stage has been like a comet. He appeared like a spark of illumination and then disappeared, almost forgotten. In his time, Tagore was an international phenomenon. His meetings and friendships with national international figures, his unstoppable pen, activisms, and practical projects portray this. I'm just reading little bits. Even during his time, however, he was often a lonely, isolated figure, working and speaking against popular beliefs and ideas. This biographical study reassesses the Renaissance man, a polymath who embodies the modern consciousness of India, engaged as he was in nation building and contributing to the narrative of a nation. and from the end. In a world of rising conflict, alarming friction, and widening fissures, Tagore's syncretism remains a lasting legacy. He sought a positive outcome of the East-West encounter and exchange so that the universal man could meet and interact through a transnational dialogue. His conviction and truth, love and compassion can nurture an amicable future between nations for a sustainable world, which makes Tagore a man for all ages. Thank you.
Thank you, Bashabi. Well, the floor is now open. Any questions? Gentleman here at the front, please.
As a Bengali brought up on a daily diet of Tagore, I've got two comments. I've always asked myself why Tagore's songs are so special. And I wonder if you would agree with me. It's a puja, prem and prakriti, all three coming together. And we find a reflection of all these three in every song and resonance every song. That's one. The second is the World Cup is going. Very soon India will be playing Bangladesh. And I'm looking forward to the moment when Indian national anthem and Bangladeshi national anthem, both written by the same man, will be sung on stage.
Indeed, indeed.
Indeed. Right.
I don't think that was a question, that was a comment well taken.
Yeah.
Can we have questions instead of comments, please? There's a lady at the
And a lady in front.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your session. I'm new to Tagore, and my question would be, how much was he building on indigenous Indian tradition, or how much was he an iconoclast, trying to smash things down, and how much was he influenced by the West, like the Romantics, say Wordsworth, or listening to some of the nature poems, nature work? It makes me think of the Western Romantics. Mm-hmm. So is it possible to make a balance sheet like that, or am I asking a silly question?
Mm-hmm.
Bashabi, I'll ask you to take that question first. Your book on Scottish Orientalism and Tagore. Just give us a quick overview.
Very quickly, I think you have really brought the many Tagores together in your question. Tagore did go back to medieval poetry, the Bhakti movement. He actually wrote about Kabir, and he was influenced by Jayadeva. He even liked the whole idea of the boy Chatterton and invented a whole character, and he wrote a whole opera. And many people thought that this was a newly discovered old poet. And Reba has mentioned the Bowls. It was Tagore, but it was the entire Tagore family, like Jyotirindranath and all. They invited Bowls onto the boat of the Padma, where Tagore was looking after the estates, and they got them to sing, and they wrote down the lyrics. So on the one hand, there was the Bengali medieval past. There were the Bowls. Tagore made Shantiniketan, Vishwabharati and the school very secular institutions, moving away from religious connotations and going back to the folk culture. So we have the spring festival, the autumn festival, the Bashant Utsav and the Sharad Utsav. We have Briksharopon, tree planting, very important now as we lose our familiar world, and also the tradition of holocarshan, which is ploughing the land. But yes, he loved the Romantics. You find lots of references to Wordsworth in him. He translated Tennyson. He wrote about Shakespeare. He wrote a critique on Macbeth, and he was very much a man of his time who took from everywhere tunes, as Reba will say, literary forms, as we all know, and the past and the present in India and beyond. He was influenced by Hindustani classical as well as Carnatic. So he was pan-Indian, but he was international. He was transnational.
You want to add to that?
Well, that's exactly what she says. I think Wordsworth and Blake, you can find resonances of both in much of his nature poetry. Mm-hmm. And he was a great traveller. And so therefore, when he travelled, he could take in these cultural influences like the Scottish music and so on, the one that I sang. It had to be with his travel. And also within India, he travelled. And so he could bring in Carnatic, South Indian music. He even visited the Golden Temple of Amritsar and brought the Sikh music into his songs. So this incorporation of so many styles made his genre of music so unique.
One question here, and then I'll come to you, please.
Thank you. Fascinating presentation. At the beginning, you mentioned Tagore's adaptation of Auld Lang Syne, and I think he did several other Scottish, perhaps English folk songs as well. My question really is, was he influenced consciously or unconsciously by the, for him, contemporary movement of folk song scholarship, as people like Cecil Sharp in England, researching the history of English and European folk song, Bartók in Hungary, basing his music. You mentioned the primacy that he gave to his own music. Was that a strand of music scholarship in Europe that interested him?
Reba, you should do that.
Well, I think so. In many ways, as I said, I think continuing from what we've been speaking, there was this eclectic mind that he
There's also
had.
someone here.
And he also believed in something called creative unity. He's written about creative unity. That is, there is a continuum in disciplines, in styles, in cultures across the world. And he tried to find a meaning in it. So folk music, whether it's Scottish music or whether it's folk music in India, that he could take, and the beat, the rhythm, that he could incorporate into his own style. That was conscious, yes, I think, because it appealed to him. Baul music appealed to him. The Bauls in particular, you see, they were from the lowest strata of the social caste hierarchy. They were not allowed access into temples. So they turned the whole thing on its head by saying that who cares, we are not allowed into temples, but this is God's temple and nobody can keep us out. And this really appealed to the free spirit of Tagore. And so he consciously took in a lot of Baul music into his own, so that there are particular songs of his which are called Robindro Baul. It's so, as a matter of fact, the Amar Shonar Bangla, which is the national anthem of Bangladesh, was actually sung to him by a postman when he was in his ancestral estates on the river Padma. And there was this postman, his name was Gagan Harkara, who came and recited this to him, and he loved it. And then he cast it into his own language, and that is Amar Shonar Bangla, Ami Tomaye Bhalobashi. So it's to that extent he'd go into folk in order to get inspiration. Sorry if that.
No, thank you.
Yes, so I'm not Bengali, but I love your Rabindra Sangeet. And talking about your son being immersed reminded me of the fact that my father was brought up in West Bengal. Actually, used to sing it when I was a child. But the relevance of it is that my son has been born and brought up here. And it's, we fight with this thing as how to bridge the gap between the East and West for children born here, but I think increasingly in India as well. But I feel there's a big resistance in India to Rabindranath and, and his popularity. And I don't understand what it is that. And was he an Indian writer and or has he been so much taken up by the Bengalis that they feel quite possessive about him? What is it?
I mean, the young people in India and with Bengali Rabindra Sangeet, the young ones, all the bands singing Rabindra Sangeet these days.
I think
What's happening to India?
you are very right. I think the best thing that has happened is when we moved beyond copyright of Tagore.
Absolutely.
And so Tagore became everybody's property, not just Vishwabharati's. And I think that is brilliant. And I think it's time, as Reba says, the music can move outside Bengal, outside India. His art has no linguistic boundaries. He belongs to the Bengal School of Modern Art. Again, people believe that he had no training. He actually had tutors coming in. But when he wanted to draw, he actually enrolled in 1928 at the Bengal College of Art. And he established Kala Bhavan in his own university. So I think there are genres of Tagore that can move across India. And can I just put in a little bit for my little center? I have established the Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies at my university. And that is to take Tagore to the UK, work with Indian institutions across India, and with a global audience. And it's called, we affectionately call it Scots, S-C-O-T-S. And I think capital S, capital T, and I think that is the answer. All of us have to work together, just as we have all enjoyed great writers. I mean, how many of us know Russian? But we have read Dostoevsky, we've read Tolstoy. How many of us know Spanish? And yet we love Neruda. So why do we have to be limited to go to Bengal? He is an international poet. He's an, isn't he? He's an international poet, and he's an international writer, and he's an international mind. I call him transnational. And I think we all need to work together to enjoy the great minds of this world together.
Please.
Just to continue what Bashabi has said and to answer what you've said, we have to translate Tagore. There's no way, and you might say so many times that translations are not like the original. You can say Gitanjali, his translations are not a patch on his original. You can say that. But then what is the alternative? And therefore, in many languages of India, Tagore has been translated. The famous poet Gulzar has very recently brought out a volume in Hindi, beautifully translated. Films have been made on Tagore themes. Even Bollywood songs have been recast with some of Tagore's lyrics and music. So I think Tagore is very eminently absorbable, if there's such a word, by cultural influences even today.
He remains an industry. He remains an industry. So I think that is the kind of positive note.
He was played in a discotheque in Calcutta when I was there, which was,
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard to take, but you know, there was a song, Pagla Hawar Badul Din, they played in a disc.
Sorry.
Please.
I'm often amazed by, how a man can be so creative when he went through one tragedy after next. Yeah, very much like Dostoevsky, who had a similar situation, went through tragedy after tragedy, but yet so creative.
Yeah, that's what brings out the creativity, the pain, which he says all the time in all his writings. If you didn't feel the pain, you wouldn't be so creative. The Beena of the heart wouldn't ring out if there wasn't pain that pulled at it.
I think he sort of believed that he tried to understand the meaning of death each time it happened. And like the Post Office, which someone mentioned here, his play was written after his own youngest son's death. It was trying to understand why a young life had to be taken away. And then he understood that the young have so much to give while they're young, you know? So even they have a lot to give.
Thank you. A couple of more questions. Yes, gentleman there. Yes, please. Okay, I'll come back.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask each of you, as individuals, and not including the books you've written about Tagore, which would be your favorite books on Tagore, and also which ones...
On Tagore.
On Tagore. And
Not written by Tagore.
On Tagore, about Tagore, yeah. Okay. That there are a lot of people here who are interested, you know, who cannot read and relying on translations and stuff. So if you could share your individual thoughts and your favorite Tagore book as well. That would be lovely. Thank you very much.
That's a very difficult question. I'd love to say my book. I think if you want a biographical introduction, Kripalani and Dr. Robinson are very good, but 1995 and 1961. On Tagore, I would say Subhashati Bhattacharya's book is excellent in English, but one of the greatest scholars who writes in Bengali on Tagore is Shankar Ghosh. And as Reba said, translation. So we need to ask Shankuda to translate. What is Tagore's favorite? It's very difficult. Yeah, I could go on and on. I mean, if you talk about novels, his Gora, you know, stands out for me. Dance dramas, how could I turn away from Chitrangoda, you know, the whole feminist question, don't put me on a pedestal, make me your companion, you know, respect me. all the songs that Reba has sung, poetry, even children's poetry, Monica Rajana Bidesh Kure, the hero, the little boy going out, the child, which is the only poem in English, and his plays, The Red Oleanders and The Postmaster, which I mentioned, and his The Religion of Man, if you want to know about creative unity and the creative principle. So many, but just a few bites.
I think Tagore's 150th anniversary had been the moment, which is 2011, when there had been a burst of writings on Tagore. And some very good works have come out. And I can think of one which is called The Essential Tagore, which came out from Harvard University and was reprinted by Shantiniketan Vishwabharati, which is really a miscellany of his writings, translated into English, and collections from his plays, short stories, prose, songs as well. I think that's a very good collection to have. And of course, one can't but talk about one's own as well. But what I did with this book is I actually took on, you see, I've sung Tagore's songs since I was 5 years old. So this was part of me. And I thought I'd write a biography with music as the leitmotif, which hasn't been done so far. Because you see, you have to be a singer to get this feeling. And I'm so happy that this book seems to have done reasonably well.
But also your book put his songs in a context of why and how he wrote.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful one.
There's also a CD.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Well,
a very great,
anymore.
not
I
anymore,
wish Penguin,
great collection of songs.
Yeah, Penguin's paperback doesn't have it because it's all about
We'll
costs.
take one last question here and we're running out
This
of
is a quick one and more a matter of fact. Could you just comment on the exchange of letters between Tagore and Tolstoy? I always think that both of them coming from such extraordinarily different backgrounds. It was interesting that they had, I believe, a substantive correspondence. Could you just say very briefly what
We've got
it
a
was
minute each, 1 minute each.
that engaged them?
Tagore.
I think I can also say that his son really thought that Leo Tolstoy's son took up the relationship between the two of them and has written about it as well. And the whole idea of the farm, of the rootedness in the rural, of the cooperative system, was something that Tolstoy found that Tagore loved and revered, but also Gandhiji actually picked up in his own ashram and with the Phoenix Boys and later on in India. So I think I'll stop there because I should ask Reba to
No, I
have
think I agree with you.
Yeah.
That this was the great, they were both influenced, inter-influence, between the two thoughts. And the ashram and the Phoenix farm, all of that, as you said, yeah. I agree with.
I think on this note, you've been a great audience. Thank you, everybody. Bashabi, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.